In our last video, we talked about some more simple particle systems in 3ds Max. So today, let's talk about one that's a little bit more complex. And by complex, I mean that it's a little bit more steps to set up, but the things that it can do is pretty much if we can imagine it, there's a way to do it. So what we're going to do is come into our Create tab because we want to create something, and under our Geometry, we're going to choose Particle Systems, the same place that we found the other particle systems. But instead, this time, we're going to choose PF Source, which stands for Particle Flow Source. We're going to click and drag in our scene, and much like everything else we've done, if we move our slider, we'll see that particles are emitting from our system. But particle flow is a little bit more robust than that, and there's a lot of options I have. In order to get to those options, in the same system, I'm going to come down to Setup and open my particle view. In my particle view, I can see we've got quite a few things going on. First, we have the PF source that we've created, and we see some default values here. And underneath that, we have all of these icons. And each one of these icons allows us to do something with our particle flow system, or our PF system. We can do all kinds of things, and these icons allow us to do that. For what I'm going to set up now, I'm going to be working and talking at the same time. So first I'm going to delete my position icon, and what that does is that tells particle flow to, when we birth a particle or when it's created, where to put it. So it's saying once it's created, we want it to be shown at the position icon, which is here. And we don't want to do that. So I'm going to delete it. I'm going to click on it and just hit the delete key. Speed, don't want it. Rotation, we don't want to rotate our object yet, don't want it. Shape, we do want to keep, and we'll go over that later. And display, we also want to keep. What I want to do is I want to use this box instead of the icon. So what I'll choose is position object. So I'll click and hold, drag that up to just under birth. And there's other ways to do it. I can right click and choose insert or append or whatever, but for me it's just easier to click and drag upwards. So if I click on my position object, on the right hand side it gives me the option to add. So I'm going to add and then choose my box. I can also go by list, and it will bring up a list of all the objects in my scene. I'm trying to grab that. It will bring up all the objects in my scene. But since mine's not very cluttered, it's just easier to add and click on the box. So what we see now is my particles will form on the surface of my box. And that's great. I have location surface, but that's not quite good enough for me. What I want to do is I want it to look like it's actually emitting from this polygon here, this surface inside the box. So from there, I'll choose, not the opposite. Instead of surface, I'll choose selected, well, I'm going to say selected faces. So I'll go into my box that's an editable poly, and I'll select my polygon, which I already have my polygon selected. So what I should see now is that my particles should emit only from that surface that I chose. So how I did that again is I went into editable polygon, selected that polygon. So this is the face that I want to use. And then inside my position object, I chose, instead of location surface, I said the selected faces. Okay, so now I'm emitting everything from that one surface. Make a little room. So it's emitting, but it's not going anywhere. And the reason why is because, well, we're not telling it to go anywhere. Just like in the other particle systems that we used, we need to create a force. I'm going to go to my Create tab, my Space Warps, Forces, and I'm going to create gravity. It doesn't matter what size my icon is, but the direction of the gravity matters. Right now we can see that my arrow is facing down, so that the strength will be pulling my object straight down. What's different about the other particle systems, though, is that I can't use my space warp to bind my box to my gravity, or even my particle flow to my gravity, because they don't talk to each other that way. Instead, everything that we do has to be inside of the particle flow, particle view. So what I can do is come to force here. I'm going to click and drag and bring that up. I'm going to say right after my objects are spawned and it goes to the position, I want you to apply a force. Then if I click on force, I have the object to add a force, or I can do it by list, but since I already know where it is and we're not cluttered, I'm going to say add this force, and it will show gravity 001. And then if I scrub my timeline, I see that my particles are falling straight down towards the direction of my gravity. I can change the strength of the gravity, so maybe even if I wanted to do a negative number, then I would see my particles go upwards, because we have a negative gravity. But for what we're going to do, let's say 0.1. We don't want them to fall too slow. Okay, that looks good. Another issue, though, is that we're falling through our geometry, and we don't want that to happen. So what I'm going to do is, like in the other particle systems when I wanted to have collision, our collision is handled through deflectors. So I went to the Create tab, Space Warps, Deflectors. In our last video, we looked at a regular deflector. This time we're going to look at a U deflector, or a universal deflector. So we'll click and drag video somewhere in our view. And then I'm going to go to the properties of that deflector. And what it allows me to do, and the reason why we're using this one is because it allows us to pick an object. So I'm going to pick my box. But again, we don't see anything happening because we haven't told pFlow anything about it. Our particle system doesn't know anything about it. So deflector is a type of collision. So what we want to do is tell particle view about our collision. So we'll click collision. I'm going to drag it just under my force. And what I can do here is I can then add my collision, my deflector. I'm going to click on my deflector. And now particle flow is talking to the deflector, and the deflector is telling it that the box is the collision. So now we see all of our particles flowing out of our box. Awesome. But right now everything is being controlled by gravity and that one deflector. But what I want is I want it to shoot out a little bit faster. So to do that, I can look at speed, because I want to increase the speed that they're moving. But instead of speed, or speed by icon, which would be our pFlow, instead I want to say speed by surface, because I'm emitting my particles from that surface. So speed by surface, I'm going to drag that under my collision, click on my speed by surface, and again I can add my speed. So I'm going to click, again I'm using this as my collision. This is where it's spawning, so I want to spawn or add my speed from that surface. And then now I can see that I'm coming out, that my particles are coming out way faster. Okay, so there's that. And what I'm wanting to do ultimately is spawn my particles, hit these two objects, and come down into this box. So to do that, I'm going to have to add collision to these other three objects, and I can do that again by using deflectors. I can't use the same deflector because it only allows me to choose one object, and I'm already choosing the box. So I'm going to create 3 more universal deflectors. Now, for this, it doesn't really matter what it is. And if you want to rename them so you can keep better track of what they are, that's perfectly fine. So what I'm also going to do is change some of the properties. So my bounciness, I don't want it near that bouncy. So maybe I'll do 0.2 with a variation of maybe 10%. Chaos, if you want to play around with these numbers, that's fine. Each one of them does something. Chaos is, we have variations in pretty much everything. Maybe we have 10% chaos and friction. If we want our surface to seem sort of sticky or not, maybe we'll have like a 2.5. And if we wanted to inherit the velocity and all that. So let's do that for these other two. I'm just going to quickly add some variation here. And I don't know if this is even going to work, but we'll see. So for this last one, we do the same thing. Maybe bounciness 10%, variation 10%, chaos 10%, friction 10%. That sounds good. Okay. Now I'm going to choose these deflectors and choose what I want them to act upon. So maybe this deflector is this object here. Maybe this deflector is this object here. And maybe this deflector is this object here. Now that I have these set up, I have to tell particle flow about them. I can do them all under the same collision. So this allows me to choose multiple things. So I'm going to add, and I've already have the first deflector there, so I'm just going to add these other 3 deflectors in there. Okay, so when I do that, I'm going to move this out of the way so that we can see what's going on in the scene a little bit better. Let's see what happens. Okay, so right now, everything goes straight from the first box, or hits the first object and goes straight into the box. Well, we're missing the second one. We're not even getting to play with it. So what I'm going to do is go into my modifier that controls that object, which is here, and change, no, this is the one I want here, and change the bounciness. So if I change this to 0.5, let's see if it happens for us now. Getting there. Maybe we'll just change this up to 1. There we go. We're hitting it a little bit. Just for ease, we'll just bring this down a little bit. And what we can see when we move it, though, is that it's acting upon all of our particles. So we're going to come down here, and maybe we'll even change the bounciness of that one. Maybe change it to 0.5. Awesome. Okay. And now when we play, we have some really neat things going on. Okay, let's move this over a little bit so we catch all of our particles. We'll play. There we go. We got pretty much all of them. Pretty much all of them. Okay. So now we've got a system where we're emitting particles from a surface, and we have collision on the surface in which it's emitting the particles. We have speed from a surface, and then our particles are jetting from that speed and hitting other objects because of the deflectors we have. The problem, though, is that if we come in to something that we think is interesting, and we try to render, the issue, if we'll notice, and I took a little break and I took something out of our particle view because what I wanted to show you with that object in there wouldn't show you. So what I did is I took the geometry or the shape out. I took the shape out. As I told you, we would be talking about that later at the beginning of the video, but I forgot to take it out. So it didn't do what I wanted to show you. But with that shape gone, and we go to render, what we see is that we have no particles in our scene. And that's because particle view doesn't know what we want it to show. So what we'll do, and at the beginning it's in there, but I took it out so that I could show you, is I'm going to take that shape and bring that shape in. And then I can choose whatever shape I want. Let's say maybe a heart. Oh, so sweet. And then what happens is I don't see anything in my viewport, but if I render, I see all my hearts. To show it in my viewport, I need to change my display from ticks to geometry. I want to show that geometry that I have. And if I want to select, I'll also select geometry. So here we can see all of our geometry, and I can resize it in my shape. So if I want it to be bigger, maybe 20, or bigger, or if I want it to be smaller, maybe 5. There we go. Yeah, we've got all kinds of neat stuff going on. If, for instance, we had our own geometry that we wanted to spawn, say something that we created in a previous video that we really liked, the shape won't really let us do that. So I'm going to click shape and delete it. And instead, I'm going to choose shape instance. What shape instance will let us do is we can choose geometry. So maybe real quick, I'll bring something in, import, merge, scenes, maybe a BMW, why not? Bring that in, and it's quite big, so let's scale that down. Something a little smaller. Maybe bring this over here so we can see a little bit better. Okay. So then I'll go back into my particle flow view, and under shape instance, if we remember, it will let me pick geometry, and I'm going to pick the geometry and pick my BMW. Now what we'll see when my particles are spawned, I spawn all my BMWs. It's awesome. And it does all the same thing, it's just different geometry. One other thing I'd like to show you is, for instance, I don't want this orange BMW anymore. Maybe I want it to look like water, or I want it to look like a solid color, maybe chrome, because I want a chrome BMW. So what I can do there is come in, we have all kinds of material things, because if we want it to have a different color, that is a material. So let's choose maybe material static. Right under the shape, right after I create it, and then let's go into our material editor real quick. And let's create a material. So we'll just say something simple. And we'll do like maybe, let me bring my diffuse color over. Maybe yellow with a high specular level and glossiness. So now we're kind of shiny. So under that material, I can then click on material and say assign this material. And it will come up with my material browser. So my scene material in slot 1, which is the one that we created, if I click that and click OK, now all my BMWs are yellow. And what I want to say is that we have barely scratched the surface of what our P-flow can do, or our particle flow can do. What I would suggest is to take a look on the internet. There are a lot of wonderful tutorial videos on some other ways that we can use particle flow. And I would suggest that you look for some of those and follow through, because then I think that you can get a better understanding of what it can do besides what we just showed today. So have fun with that.